Before I start, I feel like I should let something very clear. I love Ellen. We've been living together for about 3 years now. In fact, we were childhood friends. And I know this may sound like a fairy tale to some people, but it truly felt like we were always destined to be together. Even after graduation, when we started dating other people, it only felt truly right when we were with each other. So I don't know what took me so long to ask her out, but I'm really glad that I did. We have the same taste in music, in movies, and even food. We laugh at the same dumb jokes, and we know exactly how to comfort each other in times of need. She's the kindest, most gentle, and loving girl I ever met. We even been talking about our plans for marriage, and how we would like to have kids of our own. And this is why it hurts so much how it all went terribly wrong in just 4 nights. I would also like to say that Ellen doesn't have much of a family other than me, and some very distant aunts that she never met, and that she doesn't even know their names. I was born in a big family, with 4 siblings and plenty of cousins that were always visiting us, and even helping out when we got in trouble. Ellen has none of that. She doesn't have any siblings, and her father was an alcoholic, abusive freak that died when she was young. Her mother was a very kind and inspiring person that took care of the family by herself for many years, and almost a second mother to myself, you can say. So when she passed away last year, it hurt us both for a long time. But Ellen stays strong. She's not the type to let her feelings easily surface, so you gotta be a lot more perceptive to get what she truly feels. I used to pride myself in being capable of that. I felt like I knew her better than I knew myself. That's why this is all so strange, and frankly, terrifying. We were sleeping in bed, and I was dreaming. I don't remember what it was about, until I heard her voice very close to my ear.
Knock, 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 knock.
She was caressing my hair, gently while sitting in bed, and looking below at me. I slowly opened my eyes, groggy from sleep. Hey, what is it, babe? She kept looking at me, and repeated,
Knock, 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 knock.
I looked over at the digital clock on top of the dresser. 3:27 a.m. I had work in only a few hours. Hey, what is it, Ellen? She paused for a second.
Knock, 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 knock.
Fine, I accepted, mostly because I was expecting some kind of surprise. Ellen wasn't the type to do what she was doing for no reason. Who's there? Her smile opened up, and she answered.
Not me, so don't answer the door.
I kept looking at her, dumbfounded. Is that it? Is that the joke?
Yes.
She said, laying in the couch and covering herself with a blanket.
Thank you for answering.
Weirdo, I answered, closing my eyes and going back to sleep. The next morning things went as normal. I only remember the strange conversation while I was alone in the bathroom, brushing my teeth. I wasn't even sure if it had truly happened, or if it was just a weird dream. So we had our breakfast together, and she was acting normal, reading something from a fashion magazine. Frankly, I wasn't paying much attention, so I took the opportunity to ask about last night. Initially, she didn't seem to know what I was talking about. Then, she fixed her eyes on me, and the same smile from last night crossed her face, just briefly. And I knew it wasn't just a dream. She told me it wasn't anything important, and she stopped paying attention when I started asking more. And even though I shouldn't, I gave up. I had work and other matters to attend to, and I just brushed off the weird event, thinking it wouldn't happen again. But the following night, I woke up to her voice.
Knock, knock.
A pause.
Knock, knock.
What is it now? I said. Ellen, what are you doing?
Knock, knock.
She repeated. This time, she wasn't even touching me, just sitting in bed, looking at me with that same smile, but her eyes seemed larger, and she blinked in longer intervals. I looked at the clock, and once again, 3:27 a.m. Ellen, come on. What is it? I got work in a few hours. I can't be waking up in the middle of the night to answer some knock-knock jokes.
Knock knock.
This is getting creepy, you know? I'm not sure if this is some kind of joke you've been doing, but I don't like it.
Answer it. Knock knock.
I sighed, but also let a small laugh escape. It was creepy, of course, but she was my Ellen, but it didn't bother me as much as it should. Alright, fine. Who the fuck is there? I answer in a playful tone.
Not me, so don't answer the door.
For some reason, I felt a chill down in my spine. It was the same answer as before, and I still didn't get what it meant. But the way she said it, with a strange, monotone voice, contrasted well with her smile and the fact that I had no idea what she meant by that. What does that mean? I asked. I really don't get it. She just smiled and went back to sleep. The next day, we talked again about what was happening. She was starting to ignore my questions, and I barely got her to say anything. It was almost like she couldn't talk about it, which was very off, considering we talk about pretty much everything. I told her I needed to be well rested for work, something she should understand well, and wasn't liking her little gag every night, as I didn't want to hurt her feelings. When I got back home, we had dinner, we watched the movie, and went to bed.
Knock knock.
I opened my eyes faster this time around. In fact, I barely got any sleep. I just knew she would do it again, and kept thinking about it the whole time. I glanced at the clock. 3:27 a.m.
Knock knock.
I thought about ignoring her, just pretending I was asleep, and she wouldn't wake me up. So I closed my eyes slowly, hoping that she hadn't seen me opening them in the first place, and stayed quiet.
Knock knock.
She continued. She didn't stop. I controlled my breathing, but she kept going.
Knock knock.
I'm not answering your fucking joke, Ellen. Stop it.
Knock knock.
I ignored, but she kept going. She had never been this insistent with anything before. I tried to ignore it, but it was getting on my nerves. And frankly, I felt scared. Why the fuck was Ellen doing this? Why every night? And at the same exact time down to the minute? Why wouldn't she let me sleep until I answer her?
Knock knock.
I got up in a sudden movement. Ellen, god damn it. I was ready for a discussion, but when I finally glanced at her, it was almost like everything was drained from me. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't blinking. Just staring right at me like an animal. And her mouth was moving slowly, and she didn't stop.
Knock knock.
I didn't know how to react or what expression I had when I saw her, but my heart skipped a beat. It was terrifying, as if her gaze froze me in place. 1,000-yard stare.
Knock knock.
Who's there? I asked, feeling as if it was the only way out of that fucking nightmare.
Not me, so don't answer the door.
Ellen slowly closed her eyes and lay down. I kept staring at her while she fell into what seemed to be a deep sleep. I got up and left. I walked downstairs and sat down at the couch in the living room, staring at the night sky outside and soaking the quietness of the neighborhood. My heart was beating fast and it didn't slow down. I was too scared to sleep in the same room as my girlfriend, all because of a fucking knock-knock joke. But it was unnatural. I thought about calling someone. I thought about it all being some kind of sleep-related issue, such as some type of sleepwalking, but it didn't make any sense. I felt so tired, and decided that early in the morning, I would call an old friend who's a psychologist and get the opinion of a professional. I knew something was wrong with Ellen. I stayed in the couch as the day rose, and once Ellen woke up, she was acting normal again. Even asked me why I wasn't in bed. I didn't answer. In fact, I didn't talk to her and simply left for work. She seemed very upset, but I wouldn't do anything about it. Once I got to work, I called my friend. I told him everything that was happening, with every single detail as I'm describing right now. He didn't seem as worried, but we agreed in making an appointment for next week. Now, I just needed to convince Ellen to come with me. I received plenty of text messages from her. She seemed very worried, sad, and even confused. She apologized a lot, and it broke my heart a little bit. I felt bad. I shouldn't have, but I answered her and made her promise it wouldn't happen again. I also told her about the appointment, and she hesitated for a moment, but she agreed to go with me. So we made up. This was Ellen. After all, the girl I knew ever since I was 6 years old, the woman I loved, that had taken care of me for many years, and as much as the strange behavior creeped me out, she wasn't actually doing anything scary or even dangerous. So for a while, I convinced myself I should give her another chance. When I returned home from work, we stayed together. She even got my favorite meal ready. Ellen was acting as gentle and caring as I always remembered, and I slept with her in our bedroom, even though I didn't want to.
Knock.
I couldn't believe it. She fucking promised me she wouldn't.
Knock.
I gazed at the clock. 3:27 a.m.
Knock.
I was laying on my stomach, and I couldn't see her face. In fact, I didn't even bother to look at her. I was feeling more sad than scared at this point. Sad that she had broken her promise.
Knock.
Who's there? I answer, determined to just go back to sleep.
Not me, so don't answer the door.
I stayed quiet, and I closed my eyes. I just hoped I would be able to handle it until the appointment next week. To my surprise, I was actually able to sleep. Maybe because I hadn't been able to rest since last night. The following morning, I went back to not saying anything to Ellen, only very limited responses. I was expecting her to act same as yesterday, trying to apologize, but she didn't. Mostly she didn't even say anything, almost as if she had accepted it. She also looked tired, or at least a bit weak. I went to work, but I couldn't stop thinking about her. I didn't receive any messages. Once I got back, we had the most silent dinner I ever had in my life, and she barely ate anything. I decided to let her have the bedroom, and I would end up sleeping on the sofa. I wasn't sure if it would stop her, but I held on to the hope that she wouldn't go downstairs, only to tell me the same fucking knock-knock joke again. I covered myself with a blanket, shaked off the uneasy feeling, and tried to get some sleep. I had a deep sleep, without dreams. I felt like I was lost in darkness. Then, I heard somebody. I opened my eyes, and I saw Ellen, standing above me, looking at me with big eyes and dilated pupils that didn't seem to belong in such a completely neutral expression, watching me sleep. I almost screamed in fear, jumped out of the couch, and her eyes followed me as I stumbled across the dark room, creating distance between us. For a moment, I was able to glance at the clock above the table. 3:27 a.m. Ellen, what the fuck are you doing? I asked, desperate, but she didn't move. In fact, she didn't say anything. She just stared at me, as if I was made of glass and she could see right through me. Then, I heard a knock on the front door. I looked over in that direction, and it was followed by another knock, and another. Someone almost pounding at the door. I glanced back at Ellen, and she was still staring at me. Slowly, I got closer to the door and she didn't move. The pounding continued. Who's there? I screamed. It stopped, and then I heard a voice.
John? John, can you hear me? Open the door, please. John, please, open the door.
I froze in place. The voice kept calling me, but I couldn't believe it. It was Ellen's voice, coming from the other side of the door, but it couldn't be.
I beg you, John. Open the door. She's not me.
Slowly, I turned my head to look at Ellen, standing in front of the couch, and she was looking at me with the same eyes and a terrible, wide grin across her face. The pounding continued.
John, open the door, please.
I stayed still, not knowing what to do, and then, I don't remember what happened after that. I just woke up in my bedroom. The digital clock indicates 4:21 a.m. Ellen isn't by my side. I'm completely alone. I'm trembling uncontrollably, and I'm not sure what's going on. I don't remember what happened after I saw her terrible grin. I'm not even sure if I opened the door. I tried to look for my phone, see if I could call the police, or at least someone that I know, but I left it downstairs. All I have is Ellen's laptop, and it's where I'm writing this right now, to get some sort of advice, because I know I can't go downstairs. Everything is dark, very dark, almost as if the shadows are leaning into the room, and I can also hear a low, scratching sound. What should I do? Driving across the country is not something I enjoy. I used to not mind it so much back when I wasn't required to do it every other week. I work in the sales department for the largest office supply company in the Midwest. Basically, my job is to contact various other businesses, offices and firms, and sell them office supplies in bulk. This all used to be done virtually, but after one business requested a meeting for the sale, I was sent to do the interview just like how they were done before the digital age. Apparently, my sales pitch and presentation were so enjoyable that the word came back to my boss and they promoted me, a new position that required I conduct these in-person meetings pretty often. I received a significant pay raise, plus commission. I was also reimbursed for most of my travel expenses. It's just after you've been doing these business trips for so long, the journey itself becomes pretty repetitive and boring. Some of you might ask, why don't you just fly like a normal person? Well, I like things to be a certain way. I like to have as much control of my surroundings as possible. Versus when you go flying, you forfeit that control for convenience. If I fly and lose my luggage or have any issues with the car rental place, then I'm basically out of luck. Or if the job goes poorly, and I have to head back home before my scheduled time, I'll need to reschedule a flight, and that by itself is just a pain. So unless the location is extremely far away, I just prefer to travel my own way. Recently, I had a job come up which was in the southern part of Kansas. Having been through Kansas only once in my life previously, I can't say I was actually excited to revisit. The drive to the company was fine. Actually, it was one of the smoother trips I had taken in a while. Very little traffic and clear blue skies for as far as the eye could see. I had arrived at around 4 in the afternoon and conducted the meeting upon arriving. The meeting lasted roughly an hour and a half, though most of that time was spent sitting in a waiting room. After all was said and done, all parties involved seemed to be satisfied. I quickly called my boss to inform him of the new account that we had just acquired, and he said good work. My boss wasn't what you would call a people person, which is also why I was the one doing these meetings and not him. However, I could tell he was quite pleased. You work with someone for so long, you pick up on a few things. I tossed my briefcase into my car and hit the road. After driving for nearly 2 hours, the road and the horizon were starting to blur together. With a yawn, I looked down at the time. It was about to be 8 p.m. The burnt orange sky was quickly fading into a dark blue. As I sat there fidgeting in my seat, the feeling of having to use the bathroom was beginning to creep upon me. I kept my eyes peeled for any sign of a turnoff for a fast food restaurant or even a gas station. However, No sign was to be seen. It was just a mile marker after mile marker, and they were passing by at a rapid pace. There were no turnoffs, at least not that I could see. I grabbed my phone off my dash and began to pull up my GPS. I needed to find the nearest rest area quickly. However, before I could scan my phone, I glanced up to maintain my position on the road, and I saw a dual blue sign appear on the right. Rest stop in 5 miles, it read. I closed my phone and with a smile, I placed it back on its stand, relieved. I relaxed back into my seat and continued driving. As I was quickly approaching mile 5, I couldn't seem to spot the rest stop in the distance. I was starting to become concerned, and after another 10 stressful minutes, a building began to appear on the horizon. Seeing an entranceway, I turned the wheel and pulled in. The rest stop didn't seem like anything special, but by that point, I didn't care. I just needed to use a bathroom. I hopped out of my car, and when I did, I noticed I wasn't alone at this place. There was a truck sitting a few yards away, parked near the door to the building. I briskly walked towards the building, and as I passed by in front of the truck, I felt like somebody had their eyes on me. I turned my head and saw a man sitting in the driver's seat, staring straight ahead. He was wearing sunglasses, just sitting there with both hands on the steering wheel. He didn't seem to be looking directly at me though, just in my general direction. Aside from his sunglasses, I couldn't get a good look at his face with how dark it was becoming, but I pushed the whole situation out of my mind and continued onward. As I was leaving the bathroom, I noticed a vending machine. I bought a Snickers and stepped outside. When I did, I looked up and saw that the truck was gone. It was in that moment that a feeling of isolation started to creep up in the back of my mind. Now, I knew I had been alone in this entire trip, but for some reason, that feeling of being by myself became painfully apparent. I looked around for a few moments to see if anyone else was nearby. After shaking the weird thoughts from my mind, I hopped back into my car and returned to the highway. Once I was driving, I started to calm down. I even put on some music to help me get out of my own head. After driving for another hour, I spotted something on the side of the road, a blue sign that said, "Rest stop in 5 miles." When I read those words, a chill came over me and that feeling of isolation returned. I tried my best to get rid of the feeling from my mind. However, before I could shift my mind into something else, I saw it, the same exact rest stop. I slowed down a bit and looked at it. It was identical to the one I had previously stopped at. I tried to rationalize that the state had simply copied and pasted their rest stop design. I looked away and sped up, and I continued along the highway. I drove for another 2 hours, and by that point, the sun had set and had been replaced by the moon and stars above. Admiring the clear sky overhead, my eyes drifted down, and I saw it again. That same exact sign. Rest stop in 5 miles. I didn't want to stop at this place again, simply because this whole area was starting to creep me out. I had been driving pretty much non-stop since I left. I needed a break. And again, the same building appeared. And against my better judgment, I pulled into the parking lot. As I parked my car, my eyes drifted to the left, and I saw that same exact truck from before, in the same exact spot as before. I squinted my eyes a bit, but it was now far too dark to see if anyone was inside. I sighed, not wanting to be here any longer than necessary. I went to reach for the door handle, but then I stopped. That feeling from earlier, that feeling of eyes on me, came back. There was someone standing in front of my car's headlights. Whoever it was wasn't there a moment ago. I turned and looked at them. It was a man, just standing there in front of my car. He seemed to be wearing sunglasses, even though it was quite odd given it was the middle of the night. He wasn't moving. His arms hung limply at his side. I was able to roll down my window and call out to him, asking what his problem was, but then one of his arms began to move. It slowly lifted to his face and peeled away his dark sunglasses. His eyes were missing, two dark holes in his face, and despite him not having eyes, it still felt like he was watching me. He continued standing there, not moving a single muscle aside from removing his sunglasses. My steering wheel began to creak and groan as I gripped it tighter and tighter. Then, in the blink of an eye, he was gone. He was no longer standing in front of my car. I exhaled, trying to gasp the air back in. A moment later, my heart started aching as it pounded in my chest. Then, that feeling came back. The feeling of those eyes, watching me. I slowly turned to my left, and that face was inches away from my driver's side window. I was so close to him. I could see the reddish black skin shifting around as if there were still eyes inside looking at me. He pressed a single hand on my window, and I fucking screamed as loud as I could. I slammed my car in reverse and nearly crashed trying to spin my car around. I drove towards the exit of the rest stop, and instead of continuing the same way I had been, I turned left and decided to drive the other way this time. For nearly 45 minutes of driving, I could barely control my breathing. Every time I think I had gotten it under control, I would lose some air. I could barely bring myself to think about those empty eyes, let alone start rationalizing what that thing was. I drove for another hour before I spotted something up ahead on the right, a small roadside diner. There was a big sign out in the front that said, "Open 24 hours a day." I immediately pulled inside and parked. I just sat in my car for a few minutes, trying to collect my thoughts. During that time, I kept looking back over my shoulder to make sure whatever that thing was hadn't followed me. I stepped outside and entered the diner. A small bell announced my arrival. I saw that the inside was virtually empty. There was a single man who seemed to be a trucker sitting at the counter, drinking coffee and reading the newspaper. He gave me a passing glance and continued reading. A moment later, a waitress came rushing out of the back and told me to grab a seat anywhere. I spotted a booth near the back and quickly walked over to it. I sat down, rubbing my hands together, trying to shake off my nervousness. The waitress came over to the booth and asked if she could get me anything, with a slightly trembling voice. I just said a cup of coffee. A few moments later, she came back, and with a cup in hand, taking note of my clearly unsettled appearance, she said if there was anything going on. I just told her I had been driving on Route 83 for a few hours and needed a break. When I told her this, she returned a confused look. She asked me if I was sure I was on Route 83, and when she did, I noticed the trucker turned and raised an eyebrow at my statement as well. I nodded to her, and she told me something that I'll never forget. She said that most of Route 83 had been closed for a few weeks now, that there are roadblocks and signs all over the road itself. She also said that there's an ongoing investigation about recent disappearances that all seem to be happening in one area, near a lonely rest stop. Having to move into a new place can be a complicated process. You're basically uprooting your entire life and adjusting to your new surroundings. The finances and planning that go into such an endeavor can also be quite stressing if you're not ready, which is what happened with my situation. I had recently finished college and was currently staying with my parents. Not an ideal situation, but my mother invited me to stay as long as I provided some sort of rent. I had been staying home for roughly a year, and towards the latter months I had been searching for a new place that didn't have my parents hanging around at every turn. Towards the end of the year, my parents had informed me that they had just sold our house and were getting ready to move to the southern part of Florida. This took me by surprise as I wouldn't be able to go with them because of my work obligations. This made me find a new place to live as soon as possible. Just about all the apartment complexes in my area wouldn't have any vacancy for weeks or months. and most other places weren't even accepting applications. Getting concerned and my options becoming more limited by the day, a posting was submitted for a house on the other side of the city. It was a place for rent, and the owner didn't really seem that big on official procedures. They probably hadn't rented homes very often before. I reached out to them with my information, and they approved me only after a few days of speaking with me and reviewing my application. I exhaled a sigh of relief and was able to move in not long after. Thankfully, I don't own that much stuff, only about a bedroom's worth of belongings, so my moving costs remain fairly low. When I pulled up to the location, the renter was standing outside of the house. It was an older woman who had a deep southern accent. She was very nice and respectful. We walked throughout the house, and being honest, it wasn't much to write home about. It was a tiny single-story house with a built-in garage that could barely hold a bicycle, let alone an entire car. Overall, I was quite content with it, and the truth be told, I was just happy to have a place to live and not have to worry about moving anymore. As we approached the front door, something caught my attention. On the side of the door was what appeared to be a camera mounted into the wall. I asked the woman what this was exactly, and she mentioned that the previous owners of the house were concerned about home security, so they installed a security system throughout the house. She mentioned there being a camera at the back door as well. I was a bit surprised that someone would actually come out here for home security, given the house itself and the surrounding area, but I guess you can't really put a price on peace of mind, I thought. We finished the walkthrough, and I signed all the required documents before moving into my new home. The owner also handed me a slip of paper with all the information about the security systems. It instructed me to download an app and log in to set everything up. That evening, after I had moved most of my things into the house, I lounged on my bed with my phone. I pulled up the security app and tapped through it. The interface was fairly clunky and difficult to use. It looked quite outdated compared to the newer, higher-end systems that people purchase. However, it did let me access both cameras, the one at my front door and the one at my back. I spent a few minutes looking around at my driveway before getting bored and just opening up a game. As the hours dragged on, I eventually found myself getting more and more tired before falling asleep with my phone in my hand. When I woke up in the morning, I was confused. For the first few seconds, I wasn't sure where I was, but after taking a moment, I realized where I was and sighed with relief. I grabbed my phone to check the time and was surprised to find a notification on my home screen. It was a notification from my security system that I had previously set up. It told me that someone had rung my doorbell a short time after I fell asleep. I thought this was odd, as I had fallen asleep late in the evening. I pulled up the app and I scrolled back to that time. It gave me a precise time for the ring, but the camera showed no one standing outside of my door. I scrolled back and forth for some minutes before eventually giving up and beginning my day. Nearly a week after I had moved in, I was lounging in the living room on the cheap couch that my parents had gifted me, watching a bit of TV, when my phone vibrated in my pocket. I got my phone out to check to see who was texting me, but it was another security alert. This time, it said, "Motion detected." I opened the app and activated the camera. As the tiny feed came into view, I couldn't see anything. Then, I noticed something at the corner. Someone was standing in my driveway, but they weren't moving, just standing there near my car. I sighed and rose from my seat. I walked over to the door and opened it. I called out loud and with a stern voice, "Hello," but was quickly silenced as I didn't see anyone standing out there. My entire driveway was clear except for my car. I even stepped out and walked around my vehicle to make sure no one was hiding behind it. I then took a moment to look up and down the sidewalk, but I couldn't see anyone around. Scratching my head, I went back inside. There wasn't another incident like that for the following 2 weeks. Then, towards the end of the first month of living there, something even stranger happened. I was in my room typing up some reports I missed at work, so that I wouldn't have to get chewed out from my boss the following day when my phone suddenly began vibrating along my desk. It was almost like I was receiving multiple text messages. I quickly grabbed my phone and flipped it over. There were numerous alerts from my security system going off every few seconds. There were motion alerts from both my front door and my back door. At first, I figured the devices were messing up. That seemed to calm my mind, if only slightly. Still, I opened up the application to make sure it was just nothing. When I switched on the front door camera, I felt my heart drop. There was another shadow figure. This time, it was standing on the path leading towards my door. This might sound crazy, but it looked almost like a mummy wrapped all in black, and it was slowly moving towards the front door before stopping just shy of it. It then stepped into the light of my porch and brought its face inches away from the camera. It was shrouded, but the face that illuminated was deeply contorted. It grinned into the camera that sent chills through my body, and I felt as if it was looking directly into my eyes. It then took a few steps backward into the shadows and just stood there on the edge of the frame. I could feel my skin crawling as my heart was pumping out of my chest. That's when my phone vibrated in my hand, and I nearly dropped it as a result. Motion detected at back door. I fumbled through the app to swap the camera to the one facing my backyard. The way the camera at my back door is set up, it's mounted on the wall so I could see the entire back patio and door, with a portion of the backyard itself. At first, I didn't see anything. Then, I noticed something that made my stomach drop and my body seize. My back door was open. I always set the alarm to go off right before I go to sleep, but since I was wide awake, I still hadn't done it. I quickly stood up and rushed over to my bedroom door, locking it in the process. As I was facing my door, for the briefest of seconds, I could have sworn I heard breathing coming from the other side. A ragged, labor breathing, as if someone was pressing their face against the wood. The sound of a nail being scraped on the wood began to resonate throughout my room. Then, after a few minutes, the sound stopped. I just sat there against the wall, opposite of my door, trying to desperately rationalize the situation I was in. Before I knew it, hours had passed, and the sun was already cresting through my window, and I rose from my seat. Slowly, I unlocked the door and pulled it open. The coast was clear. I have no idea where that thing came from, or what it even wanted with me. All I know is that it's gonna take some time for me to find a new place to live. In the meantime, I'm heading down to the store to buy a hammer, wood, and a lot of nails. At this point, I'm buying a gun as well. We all have our fears, whether it's spiders, the darkness, or anything else. It's hard to find someone who isn't at least afraid of something. I am no exception. Ever since I was a kid, garages were the one fear that would never go away. 54 years on this earth, and I still can't go into a garage without turning the light on. Last night, my husband asked me to go get some milk from the garage fridge. I went, but I stopped when I heard him speak again. Hey, the garage light isn't working, so you're gonna have to use the flashlight on your phone. It's not even a big deal, I thought to myself. You're gonna have to grow up and use a flashlight. It was a habit to turn on the light and check every inch of the room upon entering the garage. I don't know what I check for, but there is always just an overwhelming feeling to do this. My siblings used to make fun of me for it, which was kind of well deserved, until one time, they took it too far. It was April 1st, and feeling very groggy and half asleep, I opened my bedroom door, and a bag was placed over my head. I heard the giggling of my sisters as they pushed me into the garage and locked the door behind me. Looking back on it, They might have been trying to help me get over my fear, but it didn't fucking work. Engulfed in darkness and also unable to find the light switch, I did the only thing that seemed rational. I screamed for what felt like hours, but it was just a minute or two. I screamed as loud as I possibly could. When my parents finally opened the door, they found me sobbing, curled up in a ball and still screaming. It took them about 15 minutes just to calm me down. I was finally able to explain what happened, but I did leave out a detail. Maybe it was just my imagination, since I was being very loud and easily could have misheard. But when I was in there, I thought that maybe just for a second, I could hear something screaming back at me. That was the only incident involving garages that I had for my entire childhood, and even up to now being an adult. That is, until earlier today. Like I said, the garage light was broken, so I had to enter it armed with just my phone. I wish I would have told my husband to do it, but maybe that wouldn't have changed anything. So I entered the room, and I walked towards the fridge. I was looking everywhere with the light of my phone. There was nothing. There are many items and objects that can take the shape or silhouette of something. I opened the door to the fridge, and that's when I felt a hand on my shoulder. I spun around, and that's when I was met with the face of my husband. "I got you, didn't I?" he said, very excited. Not amused, I sighed and grabbed the milk, then followed him out. He went upstairs, and I glanced over to the kitchen, where I saw my husband standing. So my fear wasn't so irrational all this time. It's been 9 hours now, and I can still hear footsteps above my head. I don't know what that thing is, but I guess all I can do is wait for it to come back downstairs. A couple of years ago, I went to a rehab in South California for alcohol and drug addictions. My family and friends were beginning to worry about me a lot, so if anything, I did it more for them than for me. I was there for almost 4 months. We all got pretty close. However, tragedy struck and my roommate decided to hit the needle again. Needless to say, that was the last time he ever would, as he overdosed in his apartment, collapsed in his closet with a needle still in his arm. This is where some friends and I found him, motionless. We called 911 immediately, but it was too late. A few weeks passed, and we are still living in the same apartment that he passed away in. Being sober, and not really knowing what sober people do with their time and lives all day, we did a bunch of random shit to keep our minds off our old habits. On this one specific night, we decided to use a Ouija board. We all sat in the living room and began. We said the prayer, put our hands on the planchette, and started asking routine questions and got nothing. We were about to quit when someone had the brilliant idea of going into our friend's room that passed away. Sitting in the room, we pulled everything out, redid the procedure, and asked for, let's call him Brad. We then asked, Brad, are you still with us? Surprisingly, the planchette went to yes. Both a little freaked out and a little excited, we continued. We then asked simple things like if he was okay, etc. Everything was fine until we asked Brad why he did it. The planchette then went to BADGNE. We thought about this for a while and asked, is Brad gone? The planchette then started moving like I'd never seen it move before. Z-O-Z-O-Z-O. Over and over again. I had no clue what the fuck this was, but I turned to my friend, and his face was white. When the planchette finally came to a rest, I asked my friend what was wrong. We need to quit. We need to stop this right now. Being a huge tough guy, it was strange to see him so scared. "Stop being a pussy," I jokingly said. "That's Zozo, a Ouija board demon. He acts to be a friend or family member and then finally reveals himself." I took this in and kind of chuckled to myself. That friend took off and went back to his apartment, while the two of us stayed, laughing at the demon and cussing him out. We finally asked what he wanted, and the planchette pointed right at me. Terrified, I asked, "What do you want with me?" It then started moving to the letters H-E-L-L. "You want me in hell?" It then moved towards yes. "Are you going to kill me?" The planchette stayed at yes. Getting a little freaked out, I asked, "How are you gonna kill me?" It then started moving towards F-I-R-E. And then out of nowhere, the planchette shot towards one of our candles, knocking it onto the floor, starting a small fire on the carpet. We quickly put it out, and as we were doing so, we looked back at the Ouija board, terrified. We picked up the planchette and walked back to the board and said goodbye. And then we went outside to burn that board that same night. I refused to sleep in that apartment after that night, and I ended up relapsing after going back home. So I beg you, don't ever play with a Ouija board. And Zozo, I hope we never meet again. The following story will be told from a female perspective. My husband and I always wanted our son to be adventurous. We wanted to watch him grow up asking questions about everything, seeking out answers, and looking for adventure. It seems like whenever parents have a deep desire for how they want their children to be, somehow their children end up knowing and go the complete opposite direction. As Sam grew up, he became very introverted and would actively ask when it was time for bed. He loved to sleep, and our doctor gave a lot of explanations. All the illnesses had been checked and crossed out before he said, "I think he just likes to escape. He likes his dreams more than he enjoys life." This was at the age of 8. This actually depressed us as parents. What could be so wrong, so uninteresting about his life that he would come home and just sleep? The doctor recommended that we plan family activities that were geared towards him, as a way to engage him in life, give him something to be excited about after school. So for our very first trip, we decided we would go on a hike. The mountains were about an hour away, and we considered this a mild introduction to our new family habit. When we told Sam where we were going, he was excited. We knew then that hiking had been the right activity. On Saturday, we threw together some backpacks, lunch, water, and even a magnifying glass so Sam could inspect everything closely. He was so excited the entire way there. We were all thrilled. When we parked at the trailhead, Sam leaped out of the car and almost ran up the trail without us. I had to call him back so we could keep an eye on him. The hike was short, maybe half a mile, but Sam was trying to run it like a marathon. We kept calling for him to come back and check out this bird, or this butterfly, or a log that looked like Grandpa's face. He would come and look to humor us, but then would run ahead again. Eventually, we gave up trying to point things out and let him just run through the woods. We were pleased that he had taken so well to the trip. For once, Charlie and I felt like we knew what we were doing as parents. And for anyone who's a parent, knows exactly how that feels. We got to the end of the trail and ate our lunch. We were at a ledge along the mountain that was more like a hill. The sun was high overhead, and we could see over the trees for miles. Sam quickly drowned his lunch and we let him run off into the trees. "Don't go too far," I warned him. From the rock where we sat, I was looking at Sam while Charlie went to the bathroom. I saw Sam pick up some sticks, swing them at bushes and tree trunks until the stick broke, then picked up another one. He picked one up that was too short to be swung, but he smiled at it and ran around with it in front of him, using both hands. Finally, he ran over to me and said, "Mom, feel this stick. It feels so cool." "Does it now?" I grinned, taking the stick from him. It was in the shape of a Y, and when I grabbed one of the sides of the Y, it was perfectly smooth. It looked like someone had taken a knife and from a bigger branch, shaped it into a slingshot stick. The two sides of the Y were curved, almost like handlebars from a bicycle. "Wow, that's really cool," I said to encourage him. He looked at me funny, then ran back into the woods to keep playing. We packed up lunch, stuffed everything back in the backpacks, and announced that we were ready to hike back. Sam came back without complaining, and we began walking down the trail. Instead of running ahead, Sam started to lag behind, still clutching the Y stick. He held it in front of him with both hands as before, and was swinging it around slowly, almost like if it was a magnifying glass and he were searching for something. "Come on, Sam," Charlie started saying when he stood in one place for too long. We both had to stop because he had fallen so far behind. He was pointing his stick into the trees, with his arms stretching out. He kept looking from the stick to the trees, as if he was trying to line something up. We both waited patiently for a few seconds, but the heat was getting to us and we were ready for an air-conditioned car. "Sam, let's go," I called. "Okay," he called back, but he didn't move. Charlie walked back to him. He put his hands on both of Sam's shoulders and guided him down the trail. The whole time, Sam kept both hands firmly on the stick and tried his best to point it back towards the trees where he had been looking. He didn't point it towards where he had been standing. I noticed later, but at a spot past the trail and into the trees, always at one position. Charlie finally got him to where I was at, and we kept walking. Sam eventually stopped pointing his stick and instead kept it down in front of him, both hands still being used to hold either side of the Y. We ended up driving home, pretty excited that Sam was taking home a souvenir. Our day trip had worked. He was getting involved with life, so I knew we were one step closer to our adventurous son. Over the next couple of days, lots of things started happening. They all seemed strange, not connected in the moment, but later memory would connect them for me. Sam went back to his sleeping routine. He would come home from school, go into his room, and play for a bit by himself while dinner was being made. I got him to work on homework, then served dinner when Charlie got home. After that, he went straight to bed by his own choice. This wasn't abnormal for him, so I wasn't any more concerned than usual. A few nights after we got home, I noticed that Sam's bedroom light was on. Even though he had gone to bed hours ago, his door was closed. So I went to go and turn off his light for him. I figured he might have left it on when he fell asleep or something. But the second I opened the door, Sam leaped off the floor and jumped into bed, like he knew he was in trouble. It was only 7 in the evening. I wasn't about to yell at him for not going to bed when he said he was, but his rapid jump into the bed had me worried. "Sam, what's up?" "Nothing," he said in that kiddish tone that says that I didn't do anything. I looked around the room and saw what I always saw. His toys were out and lined up in some game he must have been playing. Nothing was out of place. "You jumped up as soon as I came in. Is there anything wrong?" "No," he said. "Well, okay," I said slowly, unsure of what else to say. However, he looked at me with untold terror in his eyes. Are you sure there's nothing wrong?" I pressed. "I can hang out with you for a bit if you want." He stared right through me, his eyes wide, and it took him a few seconds to reply. No, Mother. I'm going to bed now. Can you, turn out the light?" I blinked. He's never called me Mother in his life. I should have pushed myself and sat on his bed and talked until he admitted what was wrong. But I didn't. Charlie called my name, and it distracted me. I told him good night and turned off the light, and shut the door. Talking later on with Charlie about it, Charlie thought that maybe he had somehow discovered masturbation. Even at his young age, when you rub around on the floor the right way, It just happens. Apparently, that was how he had discovered it. So I chalked the situation up to that. Sam also continued carrying that white stick around everywhere. He always kept it within reach. During dinner, he kept it on the table. When I told him that sticks don't belong on the dining room table, he kept it on his chair next to him. He took it to bed and kept it next to his head. He even took it to school. I tried fighting him on it once, but he claimed that he was taking it to show and tell. I was about to insist that he leave it home, but he looked like he might cry if I came down firm. So I let him on the condition that if his teacher mentioned it to me, that I would make him leave it home, and he agreed. One day, Charlie was taking out the garbage and the bag got caught on the door jamb. The contents of the bag spilled all over the floor, and he quietly cursed and went to get another bag. That was when he found about 20 of Sam's toys in the trash. They varied from stuffed animals to action figures. Confused, Charlie asked me if I had thrown them away, or if I was punishing Sam for something. I told him no, and was equally puzzled. Sam, for some unknown reason, had been throwing his own toys away. Together, after dinner, we sat down with Sam at the table to ask about the toys. We saw it as a cry for help. They were selected, he said in response. They weren't doing a good enough job, so they were fired. Their time was up. Charlie then told Sam that we don't throw toys away because they cost money and we don't waste things. Sam nodded, but I saw his hands clutch the sides of the white stick tightly under the table. I knew he was in stress. Something was going on. We ended the conversation on a light note, and Sam understood why we were upset. He promised not to throw away any more toys, then ran off to bed. I just remember thinking how strange the sentence was. Their time was up. That was an adult line, not something you hear from kids. Sam's school sent an email to all parents about 2 weeks after our hiking trip. The principal pleaded with parents to not let their children come to school if their child was sick, as there was a very serious flu going around the school. He even admitted that 5 teachers and 30 students had been sick over the last week alone. I showed it to Charlie, but he didn't find it as weird as I did. Just tell Sam to wash his hands more often, he said. The final straw for me came a few nights later. It was a Wednesday night when I woke up for no reason. Charlie was snoring next to me, but in between snores, I heard a whisper. Fear seized my throat, and I lifted my head off the pillow slowly to peer at the bedroom door. Someone was moving in the dark, stumbling along. Someone small and short. Irritated, I got up and walked to the door. I saw Sam skip away, as if he were crossing a field of spiders and was desperate not to get any on his shoes. Sam, I whispered, walking out after him. I turned the corner into the family room, but he wasn't there. That's when I heard bare feet race across the kitchen floor, and that made me angry. The little shit was hiding from me. I walked through the family room and noticed that the clock on the wall was way louder than normal, or maybe I was hypersensitive because I was exhausted. When I entered the kitchen, Sam was facing me. He stood next to the fridge, and the small light from it was showing his expression. He was terrified, and his little white stick was pointed right at me. Sam, I said, annoyed. I need water, he said, still looking at me with his eyes wide open. It was an obvious lie, but not one abnormal for kids caught up past their bedtime. Alright then, get some water, I said. Can, you get it? He asked me, still clutching the stick and pointing it my way. He must have seen my quote-unquote mom look, because he re-emphasized, please. I walked ahead, and that's when I noticed that he pointed the stick around me. He was pointing at something behind me. I looked around really fast and stared into the empty darkness of the family room. The clock was still loud. It sounded like a person saying the actual words. I looked around the room for a full 30 seconds, and nothing moved. What are you doing up, Sam? I asked, turning back to face him. He looked at me with real, true fear in his eyes. The stick was shaking in his hand. Sam, I said, snapping a bit. It's not time yet, he said, barely glancing at me. His gaze was transfixed beyond me. I'm not ready yet. For half a second, I wondered if he was pretending to sleepwalk. Then I wondered if he was actually sleepwalking. Then my tiredness washed over me, and I got annoyed. It's time for bed, I insisted, walking towards him. But still, he kept his eyes behind me, and the stick was pointing into the family room. Okay, he said, defeated as I approached. He took slow, unwilling steps towards the family room. I stood behind him, watching to make sure he went to bed. I saw his head look back and forth, scanning the room as he entered. He was looking for something. Then, he looked back at me, and suddenly, he screamed. With sudden movement, I turned around, hands up and ready to attack whatever was there. But nothing but darkness and the far kitchen wall. I glared down at him. He was still shaking, pointing his stick into the empty kitchen. But I was beyond annoyed now. The stick had been out of control for weeks. I think you need a break from this, I said, snatching the stick from his hand. No, he said. Sam practically leaped at me, but I jumped out the way. This was the only way I assured myself. This stick wasn't healthy after all. Don't, he cried and yelled, followed me through the family room and into the hall. All the attention that he had pointed into the kitchen was now directed at me. He tried to jump and grab at the stick, but I held it above my head. I felt like an older sibling teasing my younger brother, but this was needed. I regretted waking Charlie up, but I pushed my way into my room, tossed the stick onto the floor, and turned back to get Sam out. Give it to me, give it to me, give it to me, he demanded. I pushed him out and shut the bedroom door. I flipped the lock on the handle. What's going on? Charlie mumbled. I took the stick away. He was playing with it all night, I said, coming back to bed. Sam was pounding on the door. I convinced Charlie that we should ignore him, let him tire himself out, and tomorrow we will lecture him. He verbally agreed, even though I could sense that he didn't agree inside. It took an hour, but Sam eventually gave up, and we ended up falling asleep. The next morning, my throat felt like I had swallowed sandpaper. The flu, of course. My stomach rumbled and made me get out of bed. I found myself starting to run to the master bathroom after my stomach turned nauseous. I threw up the dinner from the night before. Stumbling out of the bathroom, I had to move aside for Charlie, who couldn't make it to the toilet and threw up into the sink. Not you as well, I sighed. I haven't been this sick since I was a kid, he moaned, rinsing his mouth out. I rubbed my eyes, still tired from Sam's ordeal last night, and got into the shower with the lights off, hoping it would help my light sensitivity. Charlie decided to call in sick and rest for the day. I got ready for the day, so I wouldn't be around in my pajamas all day, feeling even more sick. When I was completely ready, I unlocked the bedroom door and stepped out. Sam was nowhere in sight, which actually meant that he had gone back to bed. Good. I hope you're getting ready for school, I said loudly, but I didn't get a response. I went to his room and found the door shut as usual. I twisted the handle and pushed, but the door was stuck. What the hell? I said quietly. Using my shoulder, I shoved hard against the door. I heard a clatter. Then the door opened. As I entered, I saw three things right away. 1. A chair had been placed under the door handle in order to prevent the door from opening so easily. 2. The window was wide open, with the screen missing. And 3. Sam wasn't in his bedroom. We called the police immediately after searching the house from top to bottom. If we hadn't called them, I have no idea where we would have started. Maybe we should have driven around, looking for him. Maybe called his friends' homes to see if they knew where he was. The police helped, and I spent half a day sitting by the phone, puking my guts out and worrying about Sam. The police were out driving around, searching for Sam with his picture taped to their dashboards. Charlie was dead asleep when I went into the bedroom. I was debating about lying down, but I couldn't sleep while Sam was missing. I saw the stick, which had landed partially under the bed when I threw it last night. All this because of a stick. Maybe the doctor was wrong. Maybe he did have something wrong with him. But it was mental, psychological. Maybe instead of a doctor, we should take him to a psychologist. Attempting to stay awake, I decided to search the house for the 15th time, but this time, I carried the stick with me. Sam, loud enough to be heard while I walked through the family room, the kitchen, and to the stairs. Maybe he was hiding in the storage room downstairs, maybe behind a few boxes. Sam, I said again, I have your stick. I'm sorry I took it. Please come out. You're not in trouble. I descended the stairs, and halfway down, I thought I heard him reply. It was faint, far away. The words were impossible to make out. Sam, I cried desperately, spinning around on the stairs to try to figure out if he was upstairs or downstairs. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a leg move around the corner at the bottom of the stairs, towards the storage room. I was correct. I knew it. I sped down the stairs and turned the corner. The door was closed. I tried to twist the handle, but he had locked it. I pleaded while reaching for the key at the top of the door frame. When he didn't unlock the door, I stuck the key in and twisted the handle. The door popped open to reveal our pitch-black storage room. The room was in the middle of the house and had no windows. It contained our water heater and the control system for the heat and AC. The room was so large, Charlie had built shelves for us to keep our seasonal decorations, our camping supplies, and extra food and water. Sam, I said more quietly, feeling uneasy. Something about the room was getting to me. How does the clock tick, Mother? Sam said from somewhere in the room. I froze. The word mother made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Something's not right. Sam, come on out now, I said. There was light spilling in from the doorway, but it didn't illuminate enough of the room for me to search. I slowly stepped towards the center of the room, where a string was hanging down from a single light in the ceiling. With one hand, I kept a hold of the stick. With the other, I reached out to search for the string. I couldn't see it, but I knew it was there somewhere. Suddenly, the door slammed shut, and at that exact instant, my hand brushed against hair. Long, greasy hair at my shoulder height. Sam wasn't that tall. The hair was tangled and long. I yelped and jumped back, startled by the door and the hair at the same time. Then I heard Sam giggle. Do you know how the clock ticks? It came from my left, along the wall. The hair had been to my right. What else was in here with us? I was paralyzed. I couldn't see a damn thing. My phone was upstairs, so I couldn't use that as a flashlight. The ceiling light was somewhere in front of me, and the door was somewhere behind me. But every time I would reach out, I remembered touching the greasy hair and recoiled. Charlie, I called upward, hoping he could hear me, hoping he was awake. Tick, tock, tick, tock, Sam said again. My brain instantly remembered the sound the clock had made the night before. It was the same voice, faintly a voice, and faintly background noise at the same time. Sam, I whispered, but I had to throw up again. I swallowed the bile and felt one more time for the string. It brushed my hand, and I jumped back before realizing that I was feeling the string, not greasy hair. Relieved, I launched my hand out and grabbed at the string. It swung into my hand and I yanked on it hard. The single light buzzed to life, and something moved to my right. I screamed at the top of my lungs when I saw white and black. It's taken me a long time to place the shape, but now I'm sure. The skull of a deer, partially covered by stringy hair, darted away from the light, circling behind me. In absolute terror,
I squeezed my eyes shut and didn't dare open them. In the battle for fight or flight, I buried my head hoping it didn't see me. I started sobbing and wanted to run for the door, but I was too scared to open my eyes. "Mommy," Sam called from my left. I didn't respond. I was sobbing too hard. "Mommy, help. I'm stuck." Very, very slowly, I moved one finger and looked to the side. Sam was huddled up on the top shelf. I couldn't see his face, but I saw jeans and his favorite shirt. "Sam, come on down and let's go," I whispered. I can't. It's gonna get me," Sam was whimpering. I tried hard not to sob again. "Please, come get me." I fought through the fear and stepped towards the shelf, still covering my face and using a small gap in my fingers to navigate. When I reached the shelf, I closed my eyes and held my arms up. "Climb into my arms, Sam. I'll get you down, and then we'll go get your dad." My voice started breaking at the end. I'm stuck. My shirt is caught," he cried. "All right, I said, trying to be brave for him. "Guide my hand to where it's at, and I'll get you loose." He paused. "It's at the back of the shelf. You can't reach." I bit my lip to stop its trembling. With both eyes still closed, I placed my hands on the top shelf and my foot on the bottom shelf. The stick was placed on the shelf so I could use both my hands. I pulled myself up so I could reach and balance myself. Where is it?" I asked, refusing to open my eyes. "Reach here," he said, and I could feel him rotate so I could reach over him. I did, and that's when my hand ran straight into a mess of tangle, greasy hair. My eyes opened in shock. It stared back at me for only half a second, but in that split second, it spoke.
"Do you know how the clock ticks? It's fed by death."
The shelf under my feet collapsed, and as I fell, my hands pulled the shelf until it came over, coming down on top of me. I woke up in the hospital, much to Charlie and Sam's relief. It was a lot of information and questions. They asked why I was down there, and instead of sounding insane, I said that I had been searching for Sam again, just in case. Sam had been found walking on the road in the general direction of the hiking spot. He wasn't very far, thankfully, and was unharmed. When Charlie practically yelled, asking why the hell he had left in the middle of the night alone, Sam said he needed to find another stick to stop the monsters. The police were, of course, recommending that he talk to a psychologist. Then he overheard the conversation. Charlie didn't wake up until the police were at our door with Sam in hand. That was about an hour after the shelf had collapsed on me. Sam and Charlie had gone looking for me in the house and found me under the collapsed shelf. The police had been right there, thankfully, and I was rushed off to the hospital. Some of my ribs were broken, and so was my left leg. The shelf that had collapsed on me held our camping tent, the fake Christmas tree, and a few other half-empty boxes. I was lucky it wasn't the shelf that was holding the food. The door was locked when they got to it, and the key wasn't in the lock, so they had to break it down. The second that Sam saw the scene, he apparently stood over me in a protective stance, looking all around. Charlie left to get the police before they left upstairs. A couple of days after I got released from the hospital, and after Charlie had recovered from a flu that knocked him off his feet, I finally got a chance to talk to Sam. I asked him right away what was going on. It took a few minutes of him denying that anything was wrong. "I saw the monster," I admitted, which a parent really shouldn't do to their child. "You did?" he asked. I nodded. "You and Dad never saw them before. When did you see them?" "Them?" I asked nervously. That's when Sam told me what had been happening for the last few weeks. He had stumbled upon the stick by tripping over it. He said that the stick had spoken to him, and he took it to play with it. He said that whenever he had the stick, he could see the monsters. They were scary, but they stayed away when I would point the stick at them. A few of them had followed us home, walking alongside us on the trail. They came into the house at night and snuck around. They came into Sam's room, our room, everywhere. They told me that someone had to die. They told me that you had to die. So he offered the monsters toy sacrifices to satisfy their hunger. But he said that wasn't enough. Whenever I didn't have the stick, I could feel them try to grab me, but they stayed away whenever I had the stick. They kept telling me that your time was up. The time of who? I said. Yours, Mom, Sam said. They sat with him at night. They tried to convince him to put the stick down. They would offer him candy. At school, they followed him and say they would hurt people until he put away the stick. 5 teachers and 30 students ended up getting the flu. He held onto the stick as often as he could and patrolled the house at night to keep them out of my room. That was until I took the stick. Apparently, he had grabbed the stick from a skeleton in the woods. It looked like an animal skeleton. He had seen another one just like it when he got the first one, so he was going to go back and get the second one so that the monsters would stop smiling. One had actually followed him on the streets, he said, but now they were all gone. And after looking through the mess of the collapsed shelves, so was the stick. Sam told his psychologist about our conversation. His psychologist told me very angry that I shouldn't have admitted to him anything like that, because it would actually feed into his delusions. So now he was being looked at for any other possible conditions. I'm starting to think I should be tested too. How else do I explain everything that happened? One detail stands out that I can't explain though. I had unlocked the door to the storage room and left the key in the handle. So why was the key found dangling from the light bulb string?
This is going to be short because this just started happening in the last 5 days. There really isn't much background story except that my brother has been acting weird since he got back from a sleepover at a friend's house 6 days ago. By weird I mean distant, quiet, and most important, his presence in our house has felt off and a little strange, like it doesn't feel like him anymore. You know when your parents had a friend over, except to you, he or she is a complete stranger, and whenever you're in a room with them or near them, you feel uncomfortable because they're actually someone that you don't really know, so you can't speak to them or find it difficult to make conversation. That's what he feels like. 5 days ago, I woke up at 3:45 a.m. and looked at my door. It was slightly open, and I could see my brother standing there, grinning. This of course scared the shit out of me and made me jump. I walked out and turned the hallway lights on, and that's when I noticed that his eyes were shut, but he was still grinning and breathing very lightly. I quickly jumped to the conclusion that he's just sleepwalking, so I led him back to his bed and left. I didn't talk to him about it the next day because I thought it was a one-time thing. I didn't wake up on the 4th day, but it's safe to say that he was standing there staring at me. 3 days ago, I woke up and saw him standing there again. This time the door was fully open, and he was grinning from ear to ear. Now call me paranoid, but I'm 98% sure there was someone or something, a presence maybe, behind him. 4 a.m. and he went back to sleep. I wasn't home on the 2nd day, so nothing happened to me except for a weird dream where I was in a bedroom and he was in the corner, grinning with his eyes wide open. However, last night, that was the scariest. I woke up at 3:20 and I noticed him standing there again. This time, he was smiling. His teeth were visible, except it was an inhuman smile. It looked like his teeth were those of a shark, and it spread across his face in an unnatural manner. Everything was silent. My window was flapping from the wind, but I couldn't hear anything. It felt like I was in a void. Then he started to creep up slowly towards me, and I tried to move, but I couldn't. I literally could not move my body or my head. It was like a force on my chest holding me down, and my hands and legs being held down. I couldn't close my eyes or even say anything. I just slept there in fear, like I had never felt so scared in my life. In my head, I knew it was my brother, but it didn't feel like him. I felt like I was gonna die. He got up to my face, and I mean dead center, and he just stopped there and looked at me. His eyes were not open, but fuck me, it felt like they were. His breathing got heavier and heavier. I started crying. I mean actual tears from being scared dripping down my face. 30 minutes. We were like that for 30 minutes. But it felt like hours. Close to 3:55 a.m. He stopped, and the expression changed to that of an evil look again. He clenched his fist and punched me on my face in a hammering-like motion and caused my nose to bleed. Like he was punching me on my face and I couldn't move or scream or do anything, so I just laid there and took it. I won't forget what he said. He came up to my ear and whispered, "You're gonna die in this house." Then went back to his room. The second his door closed, I felt this surge of energy and I jumped out of bed and fell on the ground. I was panicking and breathing heavy. I didn't know what to do. I went into the bathroom and cleaned myself up by washing blood off my hands and nose and went downstairs. I sat there all morning until everyone was up. I fell asleep on the sofa and I didn't see him leave, but I saw him come back, but he went straight to bed. It's 2 a.m. right now, and I'm sitting in the living room with the lights on, the TV on, and I'm on the laptop just waiting. I'm not sure what's gonna happen, but I'll let you guys know. Last night, some shit got weird. I mean, really weird. At 3:15 a.m., I sat downstairs, lights on, wide awake, ready to see what would happen. 3:30 a.m., I'm in the kitchen. Sounds normal, right? But I don't remember walking there or how I got to the kitchen. I'm just there, staring at my fridge. I turned around and noticed that my fridge was my only source of light. 3 knocks, continuously, coming from the kitchen window. Someone was knocking outside. These knocks came in 3s, 6 times. Then I turned to face my door, and there he was, just standing there. The best I can describe it this time is that his entire body was blacked out, including his face. He stood there and the only thing visible was his open wide eyes, and they were more wide than normal. I could make out that he was grinning, ear to ear. I tried calling his name, but every time I did, he just shook his head in a violent manner and making this squealing sound. I tried calling his name again, and his head shook and turned even more violent to the point that it made me feel sick. He kept shaking his head, so I tried to move close to the lights to turn it on, and that's when he stopped and smiled in a way that made me jump out of my skin. I jumped back and said his name again, but this time he shook his head and said no. This time louder, loud enough that my parents easily should have woken up from it. I looked at the window, and when I looked back, my brother wasn't there anymore. I turned the lights on, and of course, they didn't fucking work. I tried stepping out of the kitchen, and this is the weird part. Every time I walked out, I walked back in, if that even makes sense. It was like I would walk out of the kitchen, but somehow end up back at the entrance walking in, and every time I tried to walk out, I just felt sick. Like I shouldn't leave the kitchen by all means, but at the same time, I didn't feel safe in there. That place felt like it had no other presence, but only that of an evil thing. I tried running out, and sure enough, I found myself in a loop where I just ran back into the kitchen. This time, my brother was there, and he had a knife in his hands. He was dark black. I mean, his whole body was blacked out, except his eyes. They were the only thing that had some sort of color to him. I even thought of the possibility that my brother was still upstairs asleep, and that this was someone else, or better yet, something else. We stood there for what felt like hours. Then he ran at me with a knife and started swinging. I grabbed him trying to stop him, and his body felt hot. I mean, incredibly hot. Bad enough that I couldn't hold him for long. I thought of screaming, but I couldn't. I really couldn't. I felt like something was choking me, making it harder for me to breathe or talk. So I kicked the fridge till something fell and broke on the ground. Now, we were on the floor. He was on top of me and had the knife inches away from my throat. His body temperature switched, then turned cold. Then he started saying what I'm going to assume is Latin words. And then all of a sudden he just stopped. He stopped trying to force the knife into me and just stared at me. His face was inches away from mine, and he smiled at me, and his eyes became wider than normal. I felt nothing during that moment. It was like he got me or something. We just lay there like that, his white eyes and sharp dagger teeth inches away from my face, and me just laying there looking at him emotionless. That's when my parents started shuffling about upstairs, and then he did something that's gonna stay with me forever. He opened his mouth, and everything was blacked out, and he screamed in this inhuman manner. If I'm being honest, I heard at least several different voices in that scream. I pushed them off of me, and he moved across the kitchen near the kitchen window, and he stood up. My parents came downstairs and turned the lights on. I put the knife down and looked at my brother, who was back to normal, but he looked like he had just woken up. He asked why he was down there. My parents looked at us confused, and I said I saw him sleepwalking, so I followed him downstairs. My mom looked at the kitchen counter and saw the knife. Then she looked at me and saw hand marks and bruises all over my hands from the fight I had with him. She asked why the knife was there, and I said someone was knocking at the window and we got scared. She looked at me, then to my brother, and then at my dad, who all looked just very confused. They told us that they heard us making loud noises and knocking around, so they woke up. I said we weren't doing anything. My dad then got annoyed and told us to get back to bed. I led my brother back upstairs. I caught a glimpse of my mom when we walked back, and she smiled at my brother, but looked at me, and her expression changed to a concerned look. We made a huge mistake. We thought it would be a fun idea, I promise. Me and my roommate Nolan, we like collecting random weird stuff. Nolan likes thrifting and dumpster diving. I like to build stuff in the garage or collect weird trinkets. If you had asked me a week ago what the worst thing we had ever found when looking through the garbage was, I would have told you that it was a bag of dog shit. That was until we found these things. It was a few days ago, and me and Nolan were cruising through some local alleys in my car, looking for treasure. We had found a few small things, some cool old plates, a busted painting, and a nice wooden side table. We were driving behind a strip mall, passing some dumpsters, when Nolan grabbed me by the shoulder. "Dude, look," he said, pointing to a dumpster just ahead of us, where a set of white feet were poking up from the top. I immediately pulled the car over and parked it in front of the dumpster. We got out, hopped up on the ledge of the dumpster, and peered inside. Mannequins. Sick. I grinned. You think we can actually fit them? Nolan asked, looking at me. We'll make them fit. Here, you fish them out, and I'll make space, I said, as I stepped down and popped the trunk of the car. I moved a few things we had found so far into the trunk, and pointed out that the mannequins could actually be stacked horizontally in the back seat. There were 3 of them. Definitely not brand new, but not too bad for a dumpster find. A few scuffs and scratches here and there, but it wouldn't be an issue. This was a good enough find to make us return home satisfied with what we got, which we actually did. We unloaded and stacked everything in the garage, and brushed off our new treasure, the mannequins. What should we do with them? Nolan asked. We both pondered for a moment. You know what would be hilarious? I started. What if we put speakers in them and made them say creepy shit to scare people? That's fucking genius, Nolan smiled, nodding his head. We spent the next hour or 2 cutting holes in the backs of the mannequins' heads and taping some small Bluetooth speakers into them. We found an app that would let us broadcast our voices from our phones directly to the speakers. So we spent the rest of the afternoon playing around with that until we got bored. We sent a few pictures and videos of them to our friends, who actually all thought that we were crazy. The other 2 roommates we had were not thrilled at the idea of the weird speaking mannequins being part of the household, but we waved them off and told them that they would get used to it. However, I wish we would have listened to them. It was the next morning, as I was having a cup of coffee and browsing Instagram at the kitchen table that Nolan had brought, laughing as soon as he saw me. Yeah, you got me good with that one last night, man, he said. Huh? You know, the mannequin you put outside my bedroom door. Real spooky, huh? He said. Was it me? I said. It must have been Amy or Sunny. Yeah, sure, whatever. I'm gonna get you back though, just you wait, Nolan said with a dismissive wave of his hand, as he took a cup of coffee for himself and went back upstairs. That day passed as any Saturday would, mostly doing nothing. A bit of cleaning around the house. Later in the evening, we invited a couple of friends over so that we could crack open a few beers and have a fire in the backyard. We showed off the mannequins, and everyone actually hated them except for me and Nolan. We didn't really care though, but we actually put them back inside so that they wouldn't bother people too much. I'm going to the bathroom, y'all. Does anyone need anything? I asked everybody standing up from the fire. 1 or 2 people wanted beers, so I nodded and went inside. The bathroom door was slightly open and the lights were off, so I figured that nobody was in there. I pushed the bathroom door open. I jumped back suddenly as I saw one of the mannequins standing in the middle of the bathroom.
Who?
Came a voice from the speaker in its head. Oh, fuck off, man, I said as my fear turned into laughing. I picked up the mannequin and carried it to the living room.
Put me down. Put me down.
The mannequin cried as I carried it.
Unhand me, Rylan.
Shut it, Nolan, I said as I propped the mannequin in the corner of the living room. I went back outside with the requested beers and flipped Nolan off as I stepped down the deck stairs. He laughed and waved me off. We spent the rest of the night drinking and laughing. The fire was turning into coals and most of our friends had left by about 2 in the morning. I finished my final beer and I told everyone good night as I threw the can on our pile of empties. I stumbled back inside and pushed my bedroom door open. I was too drunk to be scared this time, so I merely chuckled to see all 3 mannequins lined up on the far side of my bed. One of them had its arm extended, the hand pointing to the bed.
Sleepy time,
said one of the mannequins. I sighed and moved all of them back out to the living room, wondering if rescuing these things was going to make more of a hassle than worth it. I went back to the room and closed my door and crawled into bed. falling asleep to the peaceful hum of the air conditioner. I woke up late and rolled over to check my phone. I scrolled through a few Instagram notifications, checked the news on Reddit, and then almost had a heart attack when I got out of my bed to make my way to the bathroom.
Rise and shine.
Said the mannequin standing at the foot of my bed. The faces of the mannequins we had found were now blank, almost very smooth, without details. But Nolan had drawn a smiley face in Sharpie on this one. I reached over to my nightstand, and I threw a copy of the Game of Thrones at the mannequin, which hit it square in the chest, and made it fall over backwards to the ground.
Ouchie.
It said from the floor. I threw on a bathrobe and left the room. I showered and went about my Sunday. When I returned to my room to get dressed, the stupid mannequin was still sprawled on the floor, with a stupid smile on its face. I grabbed it by the arm and dragged it to the living room, where I propped it up with the other mannequins, which now also had smiley faces drawn on their blank faces. Sonny actually worked late that day, and Nolan and Amy were out doing something, so I had the house to myself. After I spent most of the day reading and playing some video games, I decided that I would finish off the last few beers left in the case from yesterday. I grabbed one out of the fridge, took a cigarette from my pack, and stepped out into the back deck. Alright, fuck these things, I said as I saw the 3 mannequins were standing in a circle around the fire pit in the backyard, holding empty beer cans in their hands. I set my beer down, walked back inside, and picked up the baseball bat that I kept next to my bed. I walked back outside. I lit my cigarette and proceeded to knock the head of the closest mannequin clean off. The white head went flying across the backyard.
Home run,
said one of the mannequins behind me, after which I immediately turned and slashed it across the torso with the bat. I laid into the mannequins, caving in the chest, knocking the heads off and bashing the limbs apart. I picked up the remains of the mannequins and carried them into the alley, where I dropped it all next to the garbage. From garbage you came, and to garbage you shall return, I said to the mannequin parts, and flicked my cigarette into the pile. How the fuck did Nolan do this? I said to myself as I walked back into the backyard. I then smoked another cigarette on the deck. I chugged my beer, grabbed another, and went back to my computer to play some more games. About an hour passed when the nicotine started to call me again, and I went back to the deck for another cigarette. I couldn't tell if I wanted to cry, scream, run, or rage as I stepped outside and saw all 3 of those fucking mannequins standing around the fire pit again. Their heads, however, were all now turned to face me, and where before they had smiley faces, all 3 of them now had frowning faces, drawn by a Sharpie. The worst part, however, was that they all had duct tape wrapped around themselves, reattaching their arms, heads, patching holes, and holding them together where I had smashed them apart. I stood in stunned silence, blinking, pinching myself, hoping I was dreaming for a good minute. I actually felt afraid to even take my eyes off these stupid things. So, staring straight at them, I put the cigarette to my mouth, puffing out the initial cloud of smoke.
ouchie,
Said one of the mannequins. Breaking our staring contest, I immediately strolled down the stairs, yanking the garage door open and grabbing the jerry can of gasoline that I kept for my lawnmower. I went back into the yard, snapped each of the mannequins in half, threw them in the fire pit, doused them all in gas, and threw my cigarette into the pile. The entire thing went up in a great rush of smoke, and the heat flashed against me so suddenly, I stumbled back from the fire pit. I did flip off the burning pile, and actually sat on one of our deck chairs, silently watching the fire burn. I knew on the inside that Nolan was most likely watching me from somewhere in secret. laughing his ass off at my reaction to these stupid dumpster mannequins. But I didn't care. I hated them at this point, and I didn't give a shit if I looked like an idiot. Once the fire had burned itself all out, all that was left were a few charred pieces that weren't really made out of anything, and a pile of molten, black, something. Plastic maybe. I don't know what they make mannequins out of. I made my way back inside the house, heading for my office. I was walking by the living room when I heard it. Pop. I stepped dead, too afraid to look. I slowly turned my head, and in the darkness of the living room, I saw 3 still humanoid shapes. They were charred black, with a wisp of smoke rising off of them to the ceiling. I felt my legs go weak and my heart started racing. I ran back to the bedroom and slammed the door. I threw everything on the top of my dresser to the floor and pitched the whole thing on its side against my door. I sat down on the floor of my room and started to write this. Please, I know that mannequins can't come to life. It's impossible. I know it is. How did Nolan do it? Why did he do it? They're not real. It's a joke. It has to be a joke. Please. You guys are the only ones who know about supernatural, creepy things. I need to know what's happening, or what's going on. I need to know that this isn't real, that I'm dreaming. It has to be that. But I never had a dream like this before. They're right outside the door. I know it, because all they're saying now, over and over, is
Sleepy time.
the town I grew up in was a nice place to live. We had everything any normal town had. Fast food joints, the movies, supermarkets, and we even had 2 different shopping malls. You might think that 2 malls would be a bit too much for a small town, and you would be correct. The reason our town had 2 was that the original one was getting ready to close, while the new one had just been constructed. Everyone I talked to, all my friends and family, myself included, all loved them, while we didn't enjoy the huge amounts of people who would gather inside the shops. The mall would bring out a sense of wonder in all of us. The new mall had just been built earlier this year. It was massive. It had department stores that seemed to go on forever. The food court had almost 30 different restaurants. It even came complete with the movies and ice skating rink. Though the place was very cool, it was often bombarded by people from the neighboring towns and cities, congesting it beyond capacity. Taking a walk through that mall was like trying to walk in the ocean underwater with ankle weights. It got to the point where I would prefer going to the smaller, older mall, which happened to be closer to my house. The older mall was constructed in the early 90s. It also had the movies, but it was a fraction of the size of the larger one. Actually, at this point in the mall's life, the only reason to go to this mall was the small arcade and to the movies. It often amused me to think that the large building was just that, a building for an arcade with a few game cabinets, and the movies with only 8 rooms or so. Malls are great, but you'll never catch me inside one after the sun goes down. It was a midwinter's day when a couple of my friends asked me if I wanted to hang out. Me, being the outgoing kind of guy that I am, I agreed. After meeting up with the 3 of them, they asked me if we wanted to hang out for a bit, then catch a movie at the old mall. I nodded, and we spent all day chilling, since school had been out for a winter vacation. At around 5 p.m., we all made our way to the mall. The walking sucked, but since all of our parents worked, and we didn't have cars of our own yet, it was really our only option. As we walked and our feet went through the slurry of mud and ice, we joked and threw snowballs at one another the entire way there. We didn't arrive at the mall until 6:30 p.m., which wasn't an issue, since our movie didn't start until 10 p.m. Walking inside the mall was like stepping inside of a rotting animal. Darkened shops littered the marble walkways. Only a few of them had their lights on, but it seemed like no one was around to maintain them. The further we walked, I noticed that they had built a sort of drywall type barrier to close off sections of the mall. Even though the sun was still out and it was setting fast, the closed sections of the mall were as black as night. The arcade itself wasn't impressive by any means, but it was nice to have something to do while we waited for our movie to start. All of us spent some time at the front row of cabinets and located games to play. I was finishing up a rather lengthy game when my friend tapped me on the shoulder, informing me about the movie. I looked down at my watch and was stunned to see that 3 hours had passed. Time truly does fly when you're mindlessly staring at a video game. So we made our way up the escalators towards the top level of the mall, where the movie theater was, and purchased our tickets. The movie was just some B-rated PG-13 horror flick, but one of our group was adamant about seeing it. When we entered the room, I wasn't surprised by how empty it was. Not only was it 10 p.m. at night, but the mall itself was pretty empty anyways. The only people we had seen while we were there was a guy behind the popcorn stand and some guy who sat in the back of the arcade, staring at a computer screen. The movie ended up lasting around 2 hours, and we weren't exiting the cinema until a little past midnight. I'm not sure why, but stepping from the theater room into the lobby was surreal. It was like I was in a place that I shouldn't be. The lobby lights were dim, and the concession stand was completely dark. One of my friends joked about going behind the counter and swiping some candy for the road, but I guess he felt guilty and he just continued walking along with us. Standing at the top of the escalators, we had a view of the entire mall. The previously illuminated shops were all dark now, and that once pitch black closed off area seemed almost like an endless void. At this point, the only sound we heard as we stood there was the clattering of the escalators as it cycled slowly. Once we were on the ground floor, we took a moment to scan around us, noting how we were most likely the only souls in the entire mall, as another one of our group suggested we go take a look around. At first, I didn't want to get in trouble, but I was eventually convinced into going along with words like, "They'll just tell us to leave, and we can just say we got lost if they find us." We walked over towards one of the sections of drywall that was put up to separate the remaining shops from the closed down area. With a slight bit of effort, we managed to slide a section out of the way for us to step through. Stepping onto the other side of the wall was a strange feeling. Earlier, when I felt like I shouldn't be there, this felt even more like danger to me, as if I went from standing on a cliff to walking on a tightrope. We began our walk through the abandoned part of the mall, two of my friends using their phones as flashlights. The only sounds we could hear were the clattering of the escalators growing ever distant, and our numerous footfalls as we pushed our way further into the darkness. We took note of the shops that had been completely gutted. Shelves and debris were scattered in and out of the shop fronts. Dismembered mannequin parts were all over the floor, both inside of the stores and outside. One of my friends picked up a mannequin hand and high-fived it before sending it flying further into the dark ahead of us. The sound it made echoed across the walls before quietly fading away. We all laughed to one another before a new sound forced us to stop. It sounded like the cracking of gravel or glass being stepped on. It was such a unique and distinct sound that we all froze in place, listening for a moment. Suddenly, a clatter sounded at my feet, and we all yelped. For a second, my friend directed his phone's light towards the sound, and I stared in shock. It was the mannequin hand that he had just thrown out. Only the wrist of the hand looked cracked and warped, as if something had squeezed it before throwing it. My friend shined his light on me, but I was too busy staring at something else. It was my other friend's phone, sitting on the ground with a light shining directly upwards. I walked over to it and gently picked it up. When I did, I flashed it around me. The light danced on the dark before I saw something that almost made me vomit. It was my friend, but he was standing as stiff as a board. He wasn't facing me, but instead was looking up at something. I shifted the light slightly, and I saw something impossible. Whatever it was, it towered above my friend, easily over 6 feet tall. Its face was twisted. I couldn't really make out its features, but with the number of teeth I saw, I didn't really want to. Its torso was short, but its limbs were like a spider's. Its legs were long and narrow. Its arms were dangling at its side. It didn't seem to be wearing any clothes, but instead had gray skin, with patches of black all over its body. I could feel my own body begin to seize when I saw the creature raise up a hand and rested it upon my friend's shoulders in front of him. He didn't even move as the creature touched him. He just stood there, silently. Just then, another one of my friends grabbed me by my shoulder, and I spun around in panic, almost knocking him down and dropping the phone. He told me we needed to leave right now. As I scrambled to pick the phone back up, when I turned, I flashed the light back on the spot from before, but my friend and the creature had vanished. In a panic, we all ran out of there as fast as we could. The entire trek home, we talked about what we had seen and what we thought happened to our friend. One of my friends said that he had only seen him standing there. The other one said that he could only see me in the dark holding the flashlight. And then I told him what I had seen, and if they had not been there, they most likely wouldn't have believed me. We all debated on what we should do, if we should tell our parents, or just pretend like it never happened. They were both in favor of acting like it never happened, but I couldn't just let one of my friends get hurt and not do anything about it. So about an hour after we got home, I made my way over to my friend's house, the one who was left behind. I knocked on his door, and his mom answered. I told her that I really needed to tell her something important, but just before I could find any word, I saw him, my friend, sitting at their dinner table, staring at the ground. I then asked if I could talk to him, but she said that he had only gotten home a few minutes ago and that he wasn't feeling very well. I returned his phone while I was standing there, and then I went home. I haven't talked to or even seen my friend over the next 2 weeks when suddenly I was passing by and there was a for sale sign in their front yard and also a sold sticker plastered across the sign itself. I'm not sure what happened with my friend or why his family moved. I'm not sure who or what that creature was, but I don't think I will ever go to a mall after dark again, and I would advise you all to do the same.
After getting let go at my office job, I was trying to find other means to pay the bills. Unfortunately, not a lot of places were hiring in my area, and the places that were accepting applications were giving out low wages that would just barely cover my living expenses. As the days increased, my search was becoming increasingly limited, until I came across the posting in search of a security guard. It was for a nationally based security company, and they hire people based on the needs of the area. When there's an influx of security requests, it opens up for new applications. To be honest, I wasn't sold on the idea, but the pay was a bit more than the other places that were hiring. The only drawback I could find were the requirements. It was my understanding that I would be assigned to various locations during my time there. One day, I might sit outside a strip mall, and another, I may be walking around a junkyard. I had to think about it for a few moments before typing up and sending off my application. A week went by without any word, and my job hunt continued. I was sure there were more people far better qualified for doing the job, so I tried not to feel too bad about getting overlooked. Then, at the end of the week, I received an email letting me know that I was scheduled for an interview the upcoming Monday. Monday morning arrived. I put on a clean suit and showed up bright and early for the interview. The senior supervisor was a large man sitting behind a desk with multiple stacks of paper on it. He had a very serious demeanor as he looked through my application. He asked me a few passing questions and continued to look through the paperwork. I had no idea if the interview was going well or poor. I just sat there patiently waiting. After a couple more minutes, he looked up from the paperwork and smiled at me. He asked when I would be available to start, and I told him as soon as possible. He nodded and explained that I would be trained over the course of a month. Then I would be dispatched out to various locations for a set amount of time. I thanked him. I shook his hand and I left. That feeling of relief returned as I hopped into my car and drove home. I've been working for the security company for nearly 2.5 years. During my time with this job, I encountered some pretty odd things and guarded even stranger locations. But the reason I'm writing this is due to a job that occurred about a week ago. I had received a call from my supervisor, informing me that I had just gotten assigned to a new location. I asked what sort of job that was, and he said it was just a small warehouse. Apparently, the company that owns it had concerns about theft happening after hours. My boss told me that we were pretty short on manpower, so unless I specifically requested some assistance, I'll be flying solo for the most part. To be honest, I didn't mind being alone for a few nights. The job began on a Tuesday. It took me a bit longer than expected to navigate the streets to the warehouse, even with a GPS. After nearly an hour of driving, I pulled into a small back lot and hopped out of the truck. I stood outside the looming warehouse, so much for it being small. I took out the keys that I had picked up beforehand and entered the rear door. I noticed the security system on my right beginning to beep, and I quickly disarmed it. I flicked the light switch and turned. When I did, I nearly jumped out of my skin. There was a face directly in front of me. I took a step back, almost falling back out the door. Catching my breath, I realized what type of warehouse this was. It was a mannequin storage warehouse. There were hundreds of mannequins of all shapes and designs standing around the building, their formless faces, all desperately trying to grab the attention of any would-be shopper. I zipped up my jacket and rubbed my eyes and began getting a lay of the land. There were a few offices towards the back and workbenches set up throughout the space. Many crates lined the walls, but apart from the mannequins themselves, everything appeared to be normal. I spent the first evening just hanging around inside my truck. I would periodically check the back door but saw nothing out of the ordinary. At around 2:30 in the morning, I was catching up on some Netflix on my phone when I heard a sound coming from outside. My attention was instantly pulled to the door of the warehouse. The sound of a door shutting. I turned off my phone. I got out and walked over to the door. I pulled the door open and peeked inside with my flashlight. Nothing immediately stood out. I called out to the interior, asking if anyone was in here, but not a single sound filled the silence. I checked my watch and returned back to my truck. I only had a few hours left before I could head home. I angled my truck to face the door and made a point to keep a better eye on it until the end of my shift. I saw nothing out of the ordinary, and at the end of my shift when I went to lock up, I thought one of the mannequins had moved slightly, but quickly buried the thought before heading home. The next 2 days on the job went about as normal as you would expect. No noises, no sign of entry or exit, just a lot of time sitting around doing nothing. Then, on the third day, I showed up to the warehouse a bit later because I woke up late. The time was close to 10:30 p.m. A good hour and a half passed when I was supposed to be there. I had been late a handful of times over the 2 years working for this company, and it's really not a big deal. I parked and went to check the interior, and that's when I noticed something strange. As I put the key into the door, I didn't feel any resistance. I twisted the knob, and the door popped open. Whoever works here must have forgot to lock up after their shift. I stepped inside to disable the alarm, and nearly fell on my ass as I saw a mannequin standing immediately to my right. It was arranged in a walking pose, with its right arm reaching out towards me. I quickly regained my composure and picked it up and moved it a few feet away so I could reach the system. I disabled it. I walked around and inspected the area again. Nothing caught my attention. I resumed my routine of sitting outside and keeping watch until my shift was over. When I went back inside to set the alarm again, I gave one more glance around, and everything was fine, until my light cascaded over the mannequin that I had moved at the start of my shift. It was standing straight up, with its arms at its sides, and its head was now looking towards the door. I pretended not to notice. I set the alarm, and I quickly stepped outside, locking the door behind me. I lightly jogged back to my truck, and once inside began to question what I saw. That mannequin was definitely in a different position at the beginning of the night, and I didn't adjust it, aside from moving it a few feet. I drove home and drank a nice tall glass of whiskey before drifting off to bed. The last day made me question whether or not to continue being a security guard. I showed up on time and went inside to check things out. There were more mannequins than on the first day, and I just assumed that they had brought more in. After my once over, I returned to my truck and began to watch a TV show on my phone. About 45 minutes into the series, I glanced up and saw something that sent goosebumps down my arms. The door to the warehouse was completely open. I got out and walked over to it. I stepped inside with my flashlight and called out asking if anyone was in here. I waited for a moment, and just when I was about to close the door and head back to the truck, the sound of something clattering in the back rang out. I felt myself jump in my skin. Something had to have caused that noise, I thought. I called out once more, summoning every ounce of courage in me to step inside. I turned the light switch on and looked around. Everything seemed fine, aside from the mannequins. I walked to the back where I heard the noise and found a small paint can resting on its side. Only there was nothing around it, not even any mannequins. I turned back to the door, and I kid you not, I watched as a mannequin stepped into my vision and pulled the door shut, while another one reached out and flicked the light switch. I shouted, dropping my flashlight in the process. I could hear the clattering of plastic and metal hitting the ground as I stood there frozen in the dark. Regaining my senses, I quickly knelt down and searched for my flashlight. My hand rested on what I assumed to be the flashlight, but it felt different. It was in the shape of a plastic foot. I recoiled back into my side and felt my flashlight next to me. I picked it up, pointing it in front of me. There were 4 mannequins all standing around me, their heads twitching to the left and right real fast, like they were trying to listen for sounds without ears. One of them reached out for me, and I scrambled backwards. When I did, I bumped into something solid. I turned, flashlight in hand, and saw another mannequin looming over me. Unable to react, and in that moment of hesitation, I felt a sharp impact on my neck. My vision went wide, followed by darkness. Sometime later, I awoke. My head was spinning. As I regained focus, I realized I was now sitting in my truck. I quickly looked around, wondering how I ended up back in here. I began to wonder if I had possibly fallen asleep in my truck, and that whole ordeal was just some sort of nightmare. The next morning, I received a call from my boss, saying that the warehouse owner said that I had left the door unlocked the previous night. I apologized to him for the mistake, and he brushed it off, saying it wasn't that much of a big deal. I then told him that I wanted to use some of my vacay time and take off for a while. He understood and said it'll be fine. Just before we got off the phone, however, I suggested not taking any more jobs from that location. He attempted to ask why, but all I could say was, the mannequins don't seem to like security guards. He took it as a joke and chuckled before telling me to enjoy my vacay. I'm not exactly sure what happened, if it was all in my imagination or not, but I think I'm gonna pass on guarding warehouses, at least for a while.